Get out of my house. Those 5 words sliced through the night like a blade. Clare stumbled backward, her hand instinctively wrapped around her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the man she once trusted with her life. Rain pelted down outside the glass walls of the Donovan estate, thunder rumbling like a warning in the distance. But the real storm was happening inside. "What did you just say?" Clare's voice trembled. She was soaked, humiliated, and 6 months pregnant. Her husband, her once loving, once doting, now utterly ruthless husband, stood there with cold, lifeless eyes and a drink in his hand. "I said," he repeated slowly, like she was stupid, "get out. This mansion isn't your home anymore. And that baby?" He pointed at her stomach, sneering. "That's your problem, not mine." Her heart dropped. Just hours ago, she had been picking out nursery colors. Now, she was being thrown out like trash. It all happened in slow motion. Daniel didn't even flinch as Clare begged him to stop, to remember what they had, to remember the promises he made. He simply snapped his fingers, and 2 security guards, the ones who used to greet her politely every morning, dragged her toward the entrance like she was an intruder. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. The marble floor beneath her felt like ice. The chandelier above, once a symbol of her new, happy life, now looked like a mocking crown she'd never wear again. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, standing on the front steps in the rain, her designer dress clinging to her trembling body. Daniel stepped into the doorway, perfectly dry in his robe and slippers. "That's not my concern, Clare. I've upgraded. I need space for someone who actually matters now." And with that, the door slammed shut. Clare stood frozen, cold, soaked, heartbroken, and absolutely furious. Because what Daniel didn't know was that Clare Madison Donovan wasn't just some ex-model turned housewife. She wasn't just the woman he met at a gala and married within 6 months. She was the hidden storm, the quiet queen. And this mansion? Oh, it wasn't his, at least not for long. 12 hours earlier, the sun had been shining over the Donovan estate. Staff bustled in and out, prepping for the couple's anniversary dinner. Clare was glowing, not just because of the pregnancy, but because she genuinely believed things were getting better. Daniel had been distant lately, yes. Longer work trips, less affection. He even changed the gate code without telling her. But Clare kept telling herself it was stress, work, pressure, the baby. That night, she planned something special. She cooked, she dressed up, she lit candles. He didn't show, not until 11:42 p.m. And when he walked in, reeking of perfume and alcohol with lipstick on his collar, Clare knew. He didn't even pretend, didn't lie, didn't apologize. He laughed. "You really thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with a washed-up trophy wife?" Those words shattered something inside her. But even then, Clare didn't fight. She didn't scream, she didn't throw things or break down. She just stood there frozen in place, heart pounding, mind racing. And when he told her to leave, she walked. Not because she was weak, but because she needed to step outside to remember who the hell she was. Because before Clare was Mrs. Donovan, she was Clare Madison Wolfe, daughter of real estate legend Grant Wolfe, sole heir to Madison Wolfe Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar private empire known for buying out broken developers like the Donovan family during economic crashes and flipping entire properties under fake holding companies. Daniel had no idea. Because when Clare met him, she never told him her real last name. She had dropped it years ago, determined to live a simple life away from the pressure, away from the press, away from predators like him. She wanted real love. She wanted someone who saw her, not her bank account. Daniel? He had pretended so well. He played the loving partner, the ambitious entrepreneur who just needed a break, the perfect candidate for a redemption romance. Clare had bought it. She had supported his startup, paid off his debts, even let the mansion be signed under his company's name. But the deed? That was still in her name, because her family lawyer insisted on it, and thank God for that. So as Clare stood in the rain, one hand on her stomach and the other clutching her keys, she wasn't crying because she was broken. She was crying because she was done. Done pretending. Done hiding. Done loving a man who saw her as a possession. She walked down the stone steps barefoot, heels in hand, heart thundering like the sky above. She climbed into the back of a black SUV waiting at the gate. The window rolled down. "Shall we proceed, Miss Wolfe?" her driver asked. Clare nodded, her voice steel. "Take me to the firm. I want the deed on my desk by sunrise." Because if Daniel thought he had seen the last of her, he was about to learn the hard way: never cross a woman with nothing to lose and everything to reclaim. Clare Madison Wolfe, age 31, occupation, former fashion model, now co-CEO of Madison Wolfe Holdings. Net worth, $3.4 billion. But if you looked at her life the past 3 years, you'd never guess. To the world, she was simply Clare Donovan, wife of Daniel Donovan, a mid-level millionaire tech entrepreneur who made his name in smart home devices. In press appearances, Clare always stood slightly behind him, smiling politely while Daniel did the talking. Her voice? Soft. Her fashion? Understated. Her presence? Deliberately forgettable. Clare had built that image on purpose. She met Daniel at a New York Tech Summit fundraiser, where she was volunteering anonymously under the name Clare Madison. She wore jeans, no makeup, and carried coffee for guests. She looked like a glorified intern. And Daniel loved it. He'd approached her with that signature grin he used on investors, smooth, cocky, a little condescending. "You work here?" he'd asked, already assuming she was beneath him. "Sort of," she had smiled. She didn't tell him she was the one who paid for the summit's private venue. She didn't mention that her company owned the entire building. That was the beginning. Daniel was charming, attentive, and, at first, surprisingly sweet. Clare had spent her whole life surrounded by men who wanted her for her name or her inheritance. But Daniel? He seemed different, or so she thought. Clare fell hard. She thought she'd finally found someone who didn't see her as a trophy. He didn't even seem to recognize her from her modeling days, when her face was plastered on every Vogue cover from Milan to LA. 6 months later, they were married. The ceremony was small, no press, just a quiet exchange of vows at a vineyard in Sonoma. Clare wore a $300 dress from an indie boutique, no designer labels, no private jets, just love. Or so she believed. Daniel insisted they live in one of the Donovan properties, a sleek mansion in the hills outside of LA. Clare didn't protest. She even let the title go under his company's name, Donovan Innovations. But her family's legal team quietly drafted a clause. She still owned the deed. The land, the structure, the airspace, it was hers. Just in case, her lawyer Rachel Hargrove had warned her. Clare had rolled her eyes then. But now, she was glad she listened. Before Clare became Daniel's wife, her life had been anything but ordinary. She was born into power, privilege, and pressure. Her father, Everett Wolfe, was one of the most feared real estate moguls on both coasts. Her mother, Celeste Madison, was a banking heiress who sat on the board of 3 global charities. From the moment Clare could walk, her schedule was filled. French tutors at 5, ballet at 6, etiquette classes by 7. By 9, she was gracing red carpets with her parents, smiling beside them like a porcelain doll. By 12, she hated it. By 16, she ran away. Well, not ran. She disappeared into the shadows of her own world, cutting ties with the press, adopting an alias, and moving to Paris to study design under a fake name. She wanted normal. She wanted silence. And she learned how to build a second life. At 19, she launched a hidden arm of her family company, a low-key investment group focused on affordable housing. She used the pseudonym Madison Clark and negotiated everything herself. By 25, that division alone was worth $600 million. But the world never knew, because Clare never wanted the spotlight. All she ever wanted was a love that didn't come with a contract. A partner, not a puppet master. That's what made Daniel's betrayal hurt so much. He didn't just cheat, he didn't just lie, he discarded her. Like she was nothing. 6 weeks before the night Daniel threw her out, Clare had just found out they were having a girl. She had printed the sonogram, placed it in a small white envelope, and set it on Daniel's nightstand. She even wrote a note in her delicate cursive. "She's going to have your eyes." Daniel never mentioned it, not even the next morning. Instead, he spent that week working late. Clare stayed up every night, hoping he'd come home early just once. He didn't. One night, she cooked his favorite dinner. He never showed. She started noticing the small signs. A perfume that wasn't hers lingering on his shirts, lipstick smudges inside his shirt collar, a second phone hidden in his car. But Clare stayed silent, because part of her still believed in him. She thought he was overwhelmed, stressed, afraid of fatherhood. She didn't think he'd leave, until he did. Until he threw her out in the middle of a storm, without even looking back. The next morning, Clare wasn't just a pregnant woman with a broken heart. She was a mother, a businesswoman, a woman born of empires and built from steel. And when Daniel locked that front door behind her, he didn't realize he wasn't locking her out. He was setting her free. Because that mansion? She wasn't done with it yet. Not even close. The Donovan estate sat on 12 acres of prime Beverly Hills land, nestled behind iron gates, hidden from the world by layers of manicured hedges and imported cypress trees. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Designed by a world-renowned architect, the mansion boasted 14,000 square feet of minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls, floating staircases made of Italian marble, and an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the city skyline. Inside, every detail had been curated for perfection, from the hand-blown glass chandelier in the grand foyer to the imported Egyptian limestone in the master bath. It was the kind of place meant for magazine covers, gala receptions, and power moves. And for almost 3 years, it had been Clare's home. Now, it was her battleground. That morning, the mansion was buzzing with activity. Daniel had planned a private gala for investors, celebrities, and influencers to unveil his latest project, a new smart security system that promised to revolutionize luxury safety. Catering teams moved like clockwork, arranging artisan canapés on gold-rimmed platters. Florists layered white orchids over crystal vases flown in from Thailand. A string quartet rehearsed beneath the massive glass atrium, while staff in black suits synchronized guest list iPads at the front gate. Everything had to be perfect. Daniel Donovan demanded nothing less. He stood in his office on the second floor, wearing a custom navy tuxedo tailored in Milan. His assistant fastened his Rolex while a hairstylist adjusted his sleek pompadour. "Sir, your speech notes are ready," his PR manager said. "Good," Daniel replied, adjusting his cufflinks. "Make sure the press knows I'll be announcing the new AI partnership with Fortis Tech. I want headlines by morning." He glanced out the window, watching the valet team arrange luxury cars like showroom pieces. Bentleys, Ferraris, and limited edition Rolls-Royces. The world was about to celebrate him. Again, he deserved it. At least, that's what he believed. But just beyond the gates, parked in a matte black SUV that didn't need to make a statement, Clare sat with her hands folded over her lap. Her hair was swept into a low chignon. Her makeup was flawless, elegant, sharp, calculated, not soft like before. She wore a black sheath maternity dress by Alexander McQueen, paired with a white Valentino trench. A single string of Tahitian pearls hung from her neck. To anyone else, she looked like royalty, but to Clare, it was armor. Her lawyer, Rachel Hargrove, sat beside her. Calm, unbothered, ruthless. "Ready?" Rachel asked, flipping open a thin leather binder. Clare exhaled slowly, one hand on her stomach. The baby kicked gently, like a nod of encouragement. "Let's end this." At precisely 10:02 a.m., just as Daniel was about to walk out onto his private terrace for press photos, his intercom buzzed. "Sir," a voice crackled nervously. Clare Donovan is at the gate." Daniel froze. "What?" "She's requesting entry. Says she has business." Daniel's jaw tightened. He hadn't seen Clare since the night he kicked her out. He assumed she'd run back to her broke little past and vanished. "What the hell does she want?" he muttered. "Should we turn her away?" Daniel hesitated. It was bad optics, sure, but the last thing he wanted was a scene. Let her in. Quietly. Bring her to the conference room. No media. 5 minutes later, Clare stepped onto the marble floor of the Donovan estate once again. The staff whispered. Their eyes widened. She didn't flinch. She walked straight past the murmurs, her heels tapping with precision, until she reached the oversized conference room Daniel used to impress investors. He was already there. Arms crossed, arrogant, cold. "You've got nerve," he said. "What, you missed the view?" Clare smiled gently. "No, Daniel, I just came to remind you whose view it really is." She slid a folder across the glass table. He opened it. His smirk faded. "What is this?" "The original deed," she said. "In my name, as it always was." Daniel flipped through the documents. He scanned the signatures, the dates. His hands began to shake. "This can't be right." "Oh, but it is," Rachel said, stepping forward. "You see, Claire agreed to let your LLC use the property as a placeholder, but ownership never transferred. The land, the house, the air rights, all belong to Ms. Wolfe." "You're bluffing," Daniel growled. "I've poured millions into this place. It's mine." "Actually," Claire said calmly, "it was leased. temporarily. You never read the fine print, did you? Outside, the gala was beginning. Guests mingled in gowns and tuxedos, waiters passed out champagne. But inside, Daniel Donovan was unraveling. "This is fraud," he barked. "I'll sue." Clare stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "You threw your pregnant wife into the rain, Daniel. You discarded me like garbage in a house that never belonged to you. You lied. You cheated. You embarrassed me." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You thought I was powerless, just a pretty ex-model clinging to your success. But here's the truth." She leaned in. "I built you. I bankrolled your startup. I let you live in my mansion. I let you walk around thinking you were king. A beat. But your throne was always rented." Rachel placed another folder on the table. "This is a notice of immediate eviction. Miss Wolfe is reclaiming the property." "You can't." "We can, and we are." Clare turned to leave. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, pausing at the door. "Make sure your new little girlfriend grabs her things. I hear she likes silk robes and diamond anklets. They're in the guest room." Then she walked out, straight-backed, silent. But in her wake, Daniel Donovan felt the empire he built on her shoulders collapse like a house of cards. Daniel Donovan wasn't born rich. He grew up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Pasadena, the youngest of three boys raised by a single mother who worked two jobs just to keep the lights on. And maybe that's why he wanted it all so badly. Money, respect, power, control. He wasn't just ambitious, he was addicted to status, craved it like oxygen. And when he met Clare, she seemed like the final piece of the puzzle. Elegant, poised, and, he assumed, harmless. He didn't know she was a wolf. All he saw was a beautiful woman with just enough mystery to spark his ego and just enough money to keep his struggling startup afloat. So he charmed her. He told her she was different. Said he didn't care about wealth or pedigree. He spoke about wanting a real life with someone grounded, someone who didn't need private jets and headlines to feel alive. Clare had bought into it, completely. And Daniel? He was playing a long game. But even in marriage, Daniel wasn't satisfied. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a prop. He wanted Clare to show up on his arm, wear the dresses he liked, smile for the cameras, and vanish when the spotlight turned off. He'd complain that she didn't do enough, even as she silently handled his legal messes, renegotiated deals behind the scenes, and paid off creditors under fake LLC names. Then came the real cracks. Daniel's ego swelled as his brand grew. He started hiring younger assistants. He changed his wardrobe, his car, his tone. He began advising influencers on side projects, many of them attractive single and very interested in upward mobility. But the moment everything truly shifted was the day he met her. Her name was Sage Bishop, an up-and-coming wellness entrepreneur with 1 million followers and a masterclass in manipulation. She slid into Daniel's DMs after he appeared on a podcast. "Loved your thoughts on leadership," she wrote. "Would love to collaborate." Daniel responded within 5 minutes. They met for coffee the next day. Then again, and again. Soon, Sage was showing up at his office unannounced. She brought organic smoothies, wore tight workout sets, and always touched his arm just a little too long when she laughed. She knew what she was doing. And so did Daniel. The affair started with texts, then dinners, then business trips to Palm Springs that Clare was told were board retreats. Sage was everything Clare wasn't, on purpose. She was loud, flashy, flirty. She posted bikini selfies with cryptic captions like "Power is sexy" and tagged Daniel in her stories with heart emojis hidden in the corners. Everyone in Daniel's inner circle knew, even his assistant. But no one said a word. Because Daniel had become untouchable, at least he thought he had. Behind closed doors, Daniel started pulling away from Clare. He stopped attending her prenatal appointments, stopped asking how she felt, started sleeping in a separate room. When Clare made him dinner, he said he wasn't hungry. When she tried to talk, he stared at his phone. When she wore a new dress, he looked right through her. Then one night, he came home late, smelled like perfume, looked like he'd been kissed. Clare didn't confront him, not yet. She just said softly, "I made your favorite." He looked at the roast chicken and roasted carrots on the table, then at her. "You know what, Clare?" he snapped. "I'm tired of this little housewife routine. You're not who I married." Her heart cracked. "I'm pregnant," she said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask you to be," he replied coldly. That night, he didn't come to bed. In the following weeks, Daniel grew bolder. He took Sage to celebrity parties, introduced her to investors as his creative partner. He even brought her to the very restaurant where he proposed to Clare. When one of his friends asked, "Where's your wife?" Daniel smirked and said, "Oh, she's doing domestic things." Sage giggled. It was disgusting. But Sage didn't just want Daniel, she wanted everything. She wanted the house, the company, the lifestyle. And Daniel, in his arrogance, began to believe he could give it to her. Starting with replacing Clare. He began restructuring Donovan Innovations to cut Clare out of consulting deals she helped build. He called lawyers, looked into transferring property titles. What he didn't realize, what he never bothered to read, was that he couldn't move an inch without Clare's permission, because nothing was truly his. Not the land, not the house, not even the patents. Clare had protected herself from the beginning, but Daniel thought she was too soft to fight back, too in love, too pregnant, too fragile. Then came that night, the storm, the screaming, the suitcase thrown down the stairs. "Get out!" He'd yelled, and she did. He thought it was over. He poured a drink, walked into the guest room where Sage was waiting in a silk robe, and said, "She's gone." Sage smiled, curled a finger around his collar, and whispered, "Good, now let's build our empire." Daniel kissed her. He felt victorious, powerful, unstoppable. But what he didn't know was that his empire was made of glass. And Clare was already picking up the first stone. The night Daniel threw Clare out was cold, rainy, and electric, with betrayal. But the real destruction, it came the next evening. Daniel, still glowing from what he considered a clean break, was preparing to make his biggest public appearance of the year, the West Coast Founders Gala. Held annually at the ultra-exclusive Argentum Ballroom in downtown LA, the event was where tech elites, Hollywood royalty, and billionaire investors gathered under one roof to sip Cristal, exchange secrets, and flaunt their wins. This year, Daniel was one of the headliners. He was set to unveil a new product prototype, make a major donation to a veterans tech program, and he thought, reintroduce himself as a newly single, desirable bachelor with Sage by his side. He had a plan. He even practiced it in the mirror. The outfit? A crisp white tuxedo with a velvet black lapel. Custom, flashy, dramatic. The entrance? Grand. He and Sage would arrive last, after most of the press had gathered. The goal? To make Clare look like a footnote. Forgotten. Gone. But what Daniel didn't know was that Clare was already 3 steps ahead. The gala began with all the usual decadence. A red carpet rolled out from a fleet of Rolls-Royces and Maybachs. Drones hovered for aerial shots. Paparazzi crowded the entrance, shouting names and snapping flash after flash. Inside the Argentum, champagne towers shimmered under Art Deco chandeliers. A jazz band played the weekend's hits like they belonged in the 1920s. Sage walked in first, her gown, a sheer metallic number that left little to the imagination, drawing whispers and stares. Daniel followed proudly, his hand on her back like she was his prized acquisition. Reporters snapped photos. "Mr. Donovan? Is this your new muse?" Daniel smirked. "Let's just say I've upgraded." Laughter. Clicks. Headlines forming in real time. Everything was going exactly as he planned, until it wasn't. 30 minutes into the event, Daniel took the stage to thunderous applause. He gave his speech, talked about innovation, legacy, reinvention, all buzzwords, all bluff. He ended with a toast. To building a future with the ones who truly understand us. His eyes found Sage in the crowd. She winked. He raised his glass, and then the ballroom doors opened. Gasps, heads turned. The crowd parted like a scene from a movie. And there she was, Clare, 6 months pregnant, standing tall, wrapped in a red silk gown that hugged her body like it had been sewn on her skin. Her hair cascaded over her shoulder in soft waves, her lips a bold crimson that matched the dress. But it wasn't just the look, it was the presence. She wasn't the soft, sad woman Daniel threw out in the rain. She was fire in heels, and she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Victor Langston, founder of Langston Ventures, worth over $18 billion, and one of the most feared men in Silicon Valley. He wasn't just a billionaire, he was Daniel's biggest competitor. Clare didn't just come back, she came back with power. The whispers grew louder. "Is that Clare Donovan? She's glowing. Who's the guy with her? Isn't that Langston? Oh my God." Daniel's face drained of color. Sage blinked, stunned. Victor leaned down and kissed Clare on the cheek. She laughed, graceful, effortless, magnetic. A photographer caught it instantly. The flash hit Daniel in the face like a gunshot. And Claire? She turned her head, locking eyes with him from across the room. No smile, no rage, just power. Pure, cold, elegant power. The MC cleared his throat, flustered. Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to welcome a late surprise guest, Clare Madison Wolfe, co-CEO of Madison Wolfe Holdings. More gasps, cameras turned, flashbulbs exploded. Daniel nearly dropped his champagne glass. Co-CEO? Wolfe Holdings? His brain tried to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. She wasn't just back, she had just revealed her true identity, and the entire room now knew he hadn't married a housewife. He had married a billionaire, and betrayed her, publicly. Claire stepped up to the podium. "Thank you," she began, her voice calm but commanding. "I hadn't planned on speaking tonight, but since my husband—" She paused, eyes flicking to Daniel. "Ex-husband decided to make tonight about beginnings. Let me add a chapter of my own." The room went still. "I'd like to announce a partnership between Madison Wolfe Holdings and Langston Ventures to fund over $200 million in equity for women-led tech startups. Starting tonight." Thunderous applause. Victor nodded proudly beside her. Claire smiled, then added, "We believe in investing in people who build, not those who exploit, who create, not manipulate." Another glance toward Daniel, message received. Daniel stood frozen, surrounded by his investors, now whispering about his lies. Sage stepped back from him, sensing the tide turning. Even the press began asking the real questions. Did Daniel know she was a billionaire? Was the mansion actually hers? Did he cheat on her while pregnant? And just like that, the narrative shattered. Daniel wasn't the star anymore. He was the villain in someone else's redemption arc. And Claire? She was no longer the betrayed wife. She was the queen who came back to reclaim her throne, in front of everyone who ever doubted her. The roar of applause still echoed in Claire's ears as she stepped off the stage. She walked gracefully through the crowd, head high, chin steady, posture perfect. But as the cameras clicked and the whispers swelled, something inside her was breaking. Not because she regretted what she said, not because she doubted herself, but because this wasn't how she imagined any of this. This was supposed to be a year of baby showers, not boardroom power plays. She was supposed to be choosing crib colors, not publicly humiliating her husband. The truth was, no matter how composed she looked on the outside, on the inside, she was unraveling. Claire slipped into a back hallway of the Argentum, away from the glitter and the flashes. She found an empty service lounge and closed the door behind her. Then she collapsed onto the couch. Her body shook, silent sobs built from deep within her chest, bubbling up until they broke free, raw and uncontrollable. She buried her face in her hands and cried like she hadn't allowed herself to since that night in the rain. 6 months pregnant, alone, betrayed. No one saw the nights she clutched her belly in the dark, whispering to the baby that everything would be okay. No one saw her lying awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, terrified she was bringing a child into a world full of lies. No one saw her scrolling through old photos, anniversary trips, cheesy grins, the way Daniel used to look at her like she hung the moon. And now? Now that look was gone, replaced by sneers, by Sage. And even if she had just made her grandest public move yet, Claire felt completely, painfully, utterly hollow. She didn't know how long she sat there. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. The door creaked open, and Rachel stepped in, heels clicking softly. Claire wiped her face quickly. "I'm fine." "You're not," Rachel said gently, "and that's okay." Claire let out a breath. "I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like I won, but I still lost." Rachel sat beside her. "You didn't lose. You reclaimed yourself. That man, he was draining your light every day you stayed with him. What you did tonight, it wasn't revenge, it was survival." "I know," Claire whispered. "It just hurts." Rachel nodded. "Because you loved him, and you thought he loved you." Claire looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. "I thought we were building something, a family, a future." Rachel placed a hand on hers. "You are, just not with him." That night, Claire returned to her temporary residence, a penthouse suite at the Ellison, one of the most secure luxury residences in Beverly Hills. Her security team, hired quietly weeks ago, cleared the lobby and escorted her to the private elevator. Inside, the lights were low. The city glittered below, but she didn't look out. She slipped off her shoes, walked into the nursery she'd started to prepare, and stared at the tiny clothes hanging on golden hangers. Her fingers brushed over a white onesie with little stars on the sleeves, her knees buckled again. She sank to the carpeted floor and curled into herself. The silence in the room felt unbearable. Claire's phone buzzed. A message from her OB/GYN. Reminder, 28-week scan scheduled tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Please confirm. She stared at the screen. Daniel had promised he'd be there for that scan. He had put it in his calendar, said he wouldn't miss it for the world. She almost smiled at how naive she'd been. The baby kicked lightly. And for the first time in hours, Claire spoke out loud. "I promise you," she whispered to her belly, "you'll never feel this kind of pain, not from me." The next morning, Claire showed up to her appointment alone. But as she sat in the waiting room, staring at the fish tank, tears welled up again. Everyone else had someone. A partner, a sister, a friend. She had bodyguards outside the building, a billion-dollar empire under her name, and legal power most people only dreamed of. But in that moment, she felt like just another pregnant woman trying to hold it together. "Claire Wolfe?" the nurse called. She stood up, fixed her shoulders, and walked into the exam room. As the cold gel touched her belly and the sonogram flickered to life, Claire's breath caught. There she was, her daughter. A perfect little profile, a tiny heartbeat, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Claire wiped her tears and laughed softly. "She's strong," the technician said with a smile. Claire nodded. "She has to be." After the appointment, Claire went back to her penthouse and let herself rest. That night, she didn't check her email, didn't review any contracts. She turned off her phone, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to just be a mother, a woman, a survivor. No headlines, no strategy, no war plans. Just Claire. And her baby. Because healing doesn't always look like victory laps and champagne toasts. Sometimes it looks like sitting on the floor in a nursery, holding a sonogram photo, and allowing yourself to cry, to break, to rebuild. And Claire? She wasn't done breaking, but she was just getting started rebuilding. 3 days after the gala, the media was in a frenzy. Pregnant ex-wife of tech mogul shocks elite gala with billionaire reveal. Claire Madison Wolfe, from quiet wife to powerhouse heiress. Who really owns the Donovan estate? Legal storm brewing after divorce twist. Claire didn't say another word publicly. She didn't need to. The press did all the talking for her. Daniel, on the other hand, was spiraling. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Lawyers, reporters, investors, even his board. Sage had gone into hiding, refusing to answer texts now that the cameras had turned against him. Worse, half his funding was now at risk. His top investor, who was also quietly connected to Wolfe Holdings through subsidiary shares, had scheduled an urgent review. The very empire he built on Claire's patience was crumbling. And yet, Daniel still didn't know the whole truth, because the biggest bombshell hadn't even dropped yet. Claire sat inside a mahogany-paneled boardroom 46 floors above downtown Los Angeles. On one side of the table sat her legal team. On the other, 2 executives from a shell company Daniel thought he'd been buying out. The man across from her adjusted his tie. "He doesn't know?" Claire shook her head. "He thinks he purchased LVC Technologies 6 months ago, but he never saw the fine print. He's leasing it from me." The room went quiet. Rachel smirked. "This is going to be good." LVC was a quiet but powerful tech company with patent sums Daniel's company had depended on for the launch of his next product. If Claire pulled out of the deal, his product would be legally dead. No launch, no press tour, no investors. Claire leaned back in her chair. "He wants to play games," she said calmly. "Let's show him who owns the board." Daniel got the letter the next morning. Official. Stamped. A cease and desist, barring him from using any LVC technology, with a full ownership disclosure on page 2. His eyes widened. His hands shook. Wolfe Holdings. Claire Wolfe. She owned it. All of it. "How?" he screamed, flinging the papers across the room. He scrambled for his phone. Tried calling Sage. Tried texting Claire. Tried reaching out to the PR team. No one answered. He was alone. Truly alone. Meanwhile, Claire was at the Wolfe estate, her real home. It sat 3 hours north on the cliffs of Carmel by the sea. Quiet. Majestic. Untouchable. The estate had been in her family for over a century, overlooking the Pacific, surrounded by redwoods and seclusion. The gate didn't just have security. It had private armed patrol. At team of elite former intelligence operatives ran round-the-clock surveillance. Claire sat outside on the terrace watching the sun melt into the ocean. She felt a new kind of peace. Her bump was growing steadily. Her doctors visited her personally now. The nursery was being reinstalled, this time with intention. No rushed baby furniture in a cold tech mansion. No pretending. No hiding. Here, she was herself. Clare Madison Wolfe, the rightful heir to a $9 billion legacy, and now, its most dangerous guardian. Rachel arrived that evening with the latest updates. Daniel's PR team is panicking, she said, setting her briefcase on the table. He's already lost 2 investors and 1 tech partnership. The market's reacting. Claire nodded, unfazed. Let it fall. Rachel hesitated. There's one more thing. She handed Claire a small black envelope. It was from Victor Langston. Inside a simple note. Anytime you want to finish him, I'll bring the match. V. Claire smiled. She didn't need Victor, but it was nice to know she had allies. Real ones. Later that night, she walked into her study, a sprawling room lined with books, floor-to-ceiling windows, and artifacts from her family's legacy. She poured herself a cup of decaf tea and opened the Wolfe archives. Inside were files going back 70 years, her grandfather's deals, her mother's charities, and now, her legacy. She placed a new folder at the front of the cabinet. Clare Wolfe as Daniel Donovan, full record. Inside were the contracts, the lawsuits, the receipts, not just revenge, proof. She closed the drawer and whispered, "For my daughter." Because one day that little girl would ask. And Claire wanted her to know. Mom didn't just survive. She rebuilt an empire on the ashes of betrayal. The next morning, Claire received a call. Not from Daniel. From the producers of 60 Minutes. "We'd like to do a profile," the woman on the line said. "Not just on your comeback, but on the hidden life you lived as the secret billionaire wife of a tech mogul." Claire paused, then smiled. "Let's talk." She wasn't done being quiet. She wasn't hiding anymore. And Daniel? He was about to watch the whole world see the truth. She was never just his wife. She was the storm he should have never underestimated. Claire stood before the mirror in the Wolfe estate dressing room, once her mother's, now hers. The golden lights bathed her in a soft glow, bouncing off the mirror's beveled edges. Around her hung rows of designer gowns, power suits, vintage coats, and hand-tailored ensembles, each piece a symbol of her rebirth. But tonight, Claire wasn't dressing for revenge. She was dressing for redefinition. The woman who stared back at her in the mirror no longer carried grief in her eyes. She carried clarity. Gone was the softness she once used to be liked. Gone was the fragility she leaned on to be palatable. Now she was deliberate, poised, and absolutely untouchable. 3 weeks had passed since the gala. In that time, Claire had made bold moves across the boardroom. She fired Daniel from every joint venture they once shared. She bought out the remaining shares of Donovan Innovations through a proxy and shuttered the company's future pipeline within days. She didn't scream. She didn't gloat. She signed papers, moved numbers, and let Daniel feel the slow, agonizing collapse of a kingdom he never really owned. Meanwhile, Claire built. She launched a new initiative under Wolfe Holdings, Embry, a venture fund named after the daughter she was soon to meet. Its purpose? To support single mothers launching businesses across the country. Already, it had raised $60 million, and it was only week 1. But Claire wasn't just rebuilding financially, she was rebuilding emotionally, with the help of a quiet, brilliant therapist named Ivy, someone who knew how to guide powerful women through personal destruction. Claire began healing the wounds Daniel had left behind. They weren't obvious bruises. They were subtle cuts. The constant criticism, the emotional abandonment, the way he always made her question her worth, even when she was pouring her soul into their life. "I kept shrinking so you'd feel big," Claire admitted during one session. "And who are you when you stop shrinking?" Ivy had asked. Claire stared at the ceiling. "I'm not sure yet, but I think she's powerful." That answer guided her through the next 2 weeks. She started each morning with a walk through the garden, barefoot in the dew, whispering affirmations to her unborn daughter. She began reading again, philosophy, finance, poetry. She turned off her phone after 7 p.m. She started eating full meals again. She let herself laugh without guilt. And most of all, she started forgiving herself, not for being fooled, but for staying too long. She realized the red flags were never hidden. She just kept hoping they'd change color. Then came the photo shoot. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Forbes had all made offers, but Clare chose something more nuanced. A cover profile for The Edit, an elite yet thoughtful digital magazine run by women for women. The theme, rebirth, power, peace. The shoot took place at the Wolf Estate. Clare wore a flowing cream dress by Carolina Herrera in one frame, a sharply tailored pinstripe power suit in another. In one photo, she stood barefoot in the garden, holding her belly. In another, she sat behind a carved oak desk, flanked by Wolf Holdings files and a laptop open to Embry's launch dashboard. No glitz, no diamonds. Just her. Real. Resilient. Radiant. The world saw it, and they felt it. The article went viral within hours. Headlines followed. Clare Wolf, from silence to strength. She didn't just survive, she redefined power. The woman who took her life back while 6 months pregnant. And Clare? She just smiled, because she didn't need anyone's validation anymore. She had her own. One afternoon, as she was reviewing charity applications for Embry, her assistant knocked. "Miss Wolf, there's someone here to see you," says he's family. Clare's eyebrows lifted. She walked downstairs and found Everett Wolf, her father. They hadn't spoken in over a year. He looked older, tired, but proud. "May I?" he asked, motioning toward the study. She nodded. They sat. "I saw the piece," he said finally. "You did well. You protected the name. You honored your mother." Clare looked at him carefully. "That wasn't my intention. I wasn't trying to prove anything." He smiled faintly. "That's how I know you've become who I hoped you would." A beat passed. "You were right to leave," he added, "but I'm glad you came back." Clare didn't cry. She didn't break. But she reached across the table and held her father's hand. And in that moment, something inside her, something old and quiet, healed. That evening, Clare sat alone on the balcony. The sky was orange and lavender, bleeding into night. She held a photo in her lap, an ultrasound from that morning. Her daughter's profile had changed, sharpened, grown. She was almost here. And so was Clare. Not the version Daniel had married, not the woman who stayed small, but the one who knew her worth, who carried legacies in her blood, and who had burned every version of herself that ever settled. The transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't glittery. It was steady, quiet, sure, like a sunrise over steel. And Clare Wolf was ready. It was a Thursday afternoon when the official invitation hit inboxes across Los Angeles' elite. Founders and Future Summit, hosted by Wolf Holdings. Venue, the Donovan Estate. Yes, that estate. The one Daniel Donovan thought he owned. The one Clare Wolf had legally reclaimed. It wasn't a petty move. It was intentional, symbolic. The place he had tried to erase her from would now host the very event that marked her return, not as his wife, but as his equal's nightmare. Clare arrived in silence. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the circular driveway of the newly rebranded estate, now called the Wolf Residence at Crescent Heights. Gone were the towering Ds on the gate. Now, the golden W emblem glistened like armor. Clare stepped out, draped in a floor-length midnight blue gown that hugged her 8-month baby bump like it was part of her legacy. Her hair was swept into a low twist. Her heels clicked with intent. Her security detail flanked her quietly, dressed in tailored gray suits, no red carpet, no theatrics, just the storm walking back into the eye. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed. Gone were the sterile tech displays and cold smart screens Daniel once used to impress. Now the space was a vision of elegance and warmth. Soft lighting, cascading flowers, acoustic string music playing above gentle conversation. Industry leaders were already mingling. Investors, journalists, female founders from across the country flown in to speak on the Embry panels. And they weren't just there to be polite. They were there for Clare, for the woman who had turned betrayal into blueprint. An hour into the summit, Clare took the stage. No lights dimmed, no music played. She didn't need dramatics. She was the moment. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice calm and magnetic. 2 years ago, I stood beside a man who told the world he built an empire from scratch, and I believed in him. A beat. I helped him build that empire. I funded it. I carried the weight in silence, until the silence became too heavy. The room was silent. "He once told me this house made him feel powerful," Clare continued. "He said the height of the ceiling made him feel bigger. The glass walls made him feel seen." She turned slightly, looking around the room. "Funny, because those same walls also let me see everything he tried to hide." Gasps, some knowing, some shocked, all transfixed. I was thrown out of this house on a rainy night while 6 months pregnant. I was told I was no longer welcome, that I didn't belong here. She paused, then smiled. And yet, here we are. Across the room, Daniel stood in the shadows. He had not been invited, but of course he came. He wore a navy suit, badly wrinkled, his once polished look now slightly desperate. Sage was nowhere in sight. He watched her, jaw clenched, eyes burning. She was radiant, powerful, untouchable, and worst of all, respected. Claire gestured toward the crowd. This summit is not about what I lost, it's about what I gained when I finally stopped shrinking. Applause erupted. She waited, then delivered the final blow. I'd like to invite you all to the exhibit room next door. There you'll see the full story. Documents, emails, financial trails of how women's labor is too often erased. How support is rebranded as dependency. How silence is mistaken for ignorance. Everyone turned. The doors to the adjacent room opened. Inside was a timeline. Clare and Daniel's startup days. Claire's silent contributions. Legal ownership papers. Emails where Daniel mocked her behind her back. One quote was printed in giant black letters above a photo of the estate. She's just a pretty face with no business sense. She should be grateful I let her stay. Daniel Donovan, internal email. Daniel's face turned ghostly white. Reporters surrounded the timeline. Phones snapped photos. His shame now had receipts. Claire didn't even look his way. She simply stepped down from the stage, shook hands with a group of female founders, and walked away. That was her revenge, not rage, exposure, in her home, on her terms. Later that evening, Claire sat on the back terrace, watching the last guests leave. Rachel joined her, sipping white tea. You really just ended that man's career, she said. No, Claire replied. He ended it himself. I just made it visible. Rachel smirked. And what now? Claire placed her hands on her belly, feeling a strong kick. Now we grow, she said. Not just companies, legacies. A few moments later, Victor Langston approached. He handed Claire a small velvet box. Inside was a wolf-branded key. A little something, he said. It's a 5-acre site in Napa for Embry's West Coast Retreat Center, fully funded. Claire looked up, stunned. Why? Victor smiled. Because you reminded the world what real power looks like, she nodded slowly. And because you know this story isn't over, Victor chuckled. No, Claire, this was just the prequel. As night fell, the wolf residence shimmered like it was newly alive, no longer a prison of betrayal, but a monument to rebirth. And Claire? She didn't just walk back in. She walked through every room she was once kicked out of, and left the door open for other women to follow. The sun was rising over the Pacific, casting golden light through the giant windows of Claire Wolfe's estate. She stood on the balcony, wrapped in a soft cashmere robe, one hand cradling her baby bump, the other holding a cup of warm tea. The world was quiet, but her story was louder than ever. It had been 2 months since the summit at the former Donovan mansion. Since the night she turned a moment of betrayal into a movement of empowerment. The media had moved from gossip to admiration. Clare Wolfe wasn't just a scandal headline anymore. She was a force. Her interview with 60 Minutes had aired last Sunday, drawing millions of viewers. Her journey, from a silenced wife to a global symbol of resilience, resonated far beyond tech circles or Hollywood gossip. And now she was preparing for her next chapter. Not as Daniel Donovan's ex-wife. Not as the girl with the hidden billions. But as the mother of a daughter she would raise to know her worth, before the world tried to take it from her. Inside, Claire sat in her study, penning a letter. Not for publication, not for lawyers, just for her daughter. To be read when she turned 18. My dearest Embry, you came into my life during the storm. You grew inside me while the world tried to convince me I was small, disposable, naive, but you were my anchor, my reason, my strength when I thought I had none left. One day you'll ask why I stayed with your father so long, why I trusted a man who didn't see my value, and I'll tell you the truth. I stayed because I believed in the version of him I first met, because I believed love could heal, fix, transform. But love doesn't work without truth, without respect, without partnership. And I want you to know, if you ever find yourself in a space where you are constantly dimming your light to keep someone else comfortable, it's okay to walk away, even if you're scared, even if you're alone, because your power is not in who chooses you, it's in who you choose to become. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope marked "To Embry on her 18th birthday," and locked it in her legacy box. A few hours later, Clare headed to Wolf HQ to meet with the Embry team. The foundation had exploded in reach. Over 3,000 applications had flooded in from single mothers across the globe, women with brilliant ideas, desperate circumstances, and nowhere to turn. Clare read each story like scripture. She didn't just offer checks, she offered mentorship, legal guidance, funding with dignity. These women weren't cases. They were Clare, in different forms: fighters, survivors, mothers. The office buzzed as Clare walked in, greeted with smiles and admiration, but not worship. Her leadership style wasn't about ego. It was about space. She didn't sit at the head of the table anymore. She sat beside her team, because the new version of Clare Wolf didn't lead from above, she led from within. That weekend, she gave a keynote at a global women's summit. Not in a designer gown, not with glitz or flash. She wore a simple black dress, flat shoes, and a necklace her mother once wore during her first charity speech in 1984. She stood tall, visibly pregnant, glowing with grace, and she told her truth. "I was once taught that strength meant silence," she said. "That dignity meant enduring quietly. That grace meant never making a scene, even when you were bleeding emotionally." She paused. "But strength, I've learned, is not how long you can suffer. It's how boldly you rise after someone tries to bury you." Applause swelled. Dignity is not about staying when you're being disrespected. It's in walking away with your head held high, even when your knees are shaking. The crowd leaned in. And grace? Grace is not weakness. Grace is being able to tell your story without bitterness, to rebuild without revenge, and to still believe in love, even after you've been betrayed by it. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. She let it be seen. Because healing isn't shameful, it's human. After the speech, women lined up for hugs, not autographs. They told her about their divorces, their miscarriages, their betrayals, their silent sufferings. And one by one, Clare reminded each of them, "You are not weak for being broken. You are powerful for rebuilding." That night, Clare went into labor. It was early, but not dangerously so. The contractions started slow, then stronger. She was rushed to her private hospital suite, surrounded by the best doctors, her team, and a midwife who had delivered generations of Wolf children. And just after midnight, under soft lights and steady breath, Embry Wolf entered the world. 7 pounds, 10 ounces, eyes wide open. She didn't cry at first. She looked around, curious, brave, still, like she already knew she came from a line of women who refused to shrink. Clare held her daughter, tears slipping freely. "You're safe now," she whispered. "And I promise, this world won't teach you that love is earned through silence, or that worth is given by someone else's approval." She kissed Embry's forehead. "You were born from fire, but you'll grow in light." A week later, Clare announced that she would be stepping back from public life, at least for a while. Not because she was retreating, but because she had won. And now it was time to rest, to raise, to enjoy. The battle was over, and the empire, it was thriving. In the end, Clare Wolf didn't just survive a public betrayal. She turned it into a blueprint for freedom, for healing, for women who forgot their worth. And as her final public post read, beneath a photo of her holding baby Embry, "To every woman who thought she had to break to be loved, you are the storm. You are the sun. And you were never just somebody's wife. You are somebody." So the story has ended. Our wonderful friends, are you still here with us until now? If you're still watching, still feeling something stir deep in your heart, then maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't just a drama to you. Maybe it was a mirror, a reminder. Here's the truth. Pain doesn't break you. Silence doesn't erase your worth. And being kind, loving, soft, that doesn't make you weak. As the poet of heterodoxism once wrote, she didn't scream, she didn't shatter, she rose, quietly in full form, unapologetic and unmovable. Clare's story reminds us all, never let anyone make you shrink to fit inside their world. Build your own. If this story moved you in any way, please take a moment to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. What part of Clare's journey hit you the hardest? Let's heal together. Let's rise together. This is your space.